So how did I end up a captive? We took off out of Bogota, Colombia. Just out of nowhere, I hear this very loud noise. It's just a bzzz sound. We're in an airplane. It's got only one engine, and we just lost the engine. Our pilot, he saw a little tiny postage stamp clearing. I see this group of people. They're all running towards us, and some are shooting at us. In Colombia, all of that cocaine production is controlled by terrorist groups. The biggest one at that time was called the FARC. They call themselves revolutionaries, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. They're really, though, they're just terrorists. That's when it dawned on me, it's like, we just landed on the FARC. They had their weapons drawn on us, and they approached, and we put our hands up, and they took us.
In these first 4 months, what were your captors like? Were they doing little tortures and little things to needle you? Was there somebody there that was at least nice? Was there anybody that had any kind of care for you guys at all?
So the structure of that group is, they have their bosses, right? Martin Sombra, a little fat dude with the long fingernails. He was an older guy. He was probably, these guys age rough. He looked 60. He probably was only late 30s, or 40s. But that's one of their older guys. The rest are almost all kids. When we were approached at the crash site, the ones that had their weapons drawn on us, they were all young. 17, 16, 18, they were all young. And so our guards were young. And one of the guards, we called him the songster because he was always singing these terrible songs, man. It was, it's like that torture where they play heavy metal music. That's what his voice was for me. But the kid didn't even go through puberty yet. They held us hostage so long. I watched his voice change. I watched him grow a mustache. He was so young. He went through puberty. I think he was only 14 or 15 years old. So a lot of their manpower is actually youths. They're juveniles. They're under the age of 18, most of them. And they join these groups super young. Like they join at 12, 13 years old. And that's how they're able to do what they do. Because if they didn't have manpower, they wouldn't be able to manage this. But it's real easy for them to go into these little villages out in the middle of nowhere in the countryside of Colombia, and they show up wearing uniforms. They've got weapons. They say these big flowery words, but they never say anything. But they give the aura of having authority. And they show up and they start recruiting. And for the families that don't want to give any of their kids up, then they take them anyways. And so they'll do forced recruitment, and force kids in. And that's what a lot of the FARC are. So you've got your boss, you got your big bosses, right? They're the ones that are reaping all the benefits. They're the ones that have access to money. These people have lots of money. Then you have your lower tier bosses like Martin Sombra, just a scumbag. And he's a man, but his girlfriend is probably 14, 15. They always take these super young girls to be their partners. And then you have like their foot soldiers, their slaves, which are usually just kids, and a lot of those kids, they don't know what they're getting into when they go in that. Once you join, once you go into the FARC, there's, you don't get to say, okay, I completed my contract, I'm going home. No, that's a for life thing. The only way out is to escape. Either escape by, getting away, but some of them will just kill themselves. In that camp that we got bombed, one of the guards blew his head off before the bombing, and we heard it. He shot himself. So it just shows, though, when you have these areas in these countries where there's no government presence, and there's very little education, man, it's easy to manipulate, super easy to manipulate those people.
So back on track, your captors, did they do anything to needle you or torture you, especially in those first months?
Yeah, so in the beginning, meaning the very first few days, they were physically, hard on us, hitting us, shoving us, pushing us, pulling us, whatever they need to do to keep us moving. At some point, they were told not to do that anymore because that just shut off. After a few days, they didn't lay hands on us anymore. Then it became more of a psychological thing. You know, they would tell us, hey, today we're going to release you, but we gotta move, you know, 13 kilometers or whatever the distance was. We've got to move. And then when we get to this point, your family's going to be waiting for you and we're going to release you, you know? And so they would start playing games like that. And it was just a lie to keep us moving, you know, and they did that more than once. It was a couple of times, you know, and when you're in such a hopeless situation and you're desperate, you know better, but you still think maybe they are going to let us free this time, you know, maybe this is the time that they let us go. But it was, you know, it was a lot of those types of mental manipulations. And they would go on and, you know, do that the entire captivity. That was their thing.
So when did you start to know that because obviously there's hope. Somebody comes and tells you, hey, we're going to let you go. We got to cover these 13 kilometers. Cover this for us today. We're gonna get you home to your family. There's a couple questions there. One is, when did you realize that there wasn't any hope? And did you feel like your family knew that you were alive or didn't know? I mean, obviously you couldn't know what was being translated back in the United States at that time, but do you feel like, hey, my family probably thinks I'm dead, or like what? Mark, this is hard stuff, man. This is real stuff. And I want you to be able to vocalize freely and know that, you know,
right. Yeah.
There's no judgment about anything.
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
This is hard.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, you know, as far as the family, we had no information. We didn't know anything. But we knew that there was an effort underway to find us because we could hear the activity. We could hear helicopters. We could hear aircraft. And so we knew that something was being done to find us. And so that, you know, as an analyst, you know, that made me think, well, they probably think we're alive. Family probably thinks we're alive. And hopefully, you know, they're doing something to get us out of there. You know, and I touched on the fact that this group is super wealthy, man. They're controlling so much cocaine that's coming out of Colombia, pretty much all of it. It's a billions-dollar industry for them, and they have so much cash that they don't, you know, they don't even have a way to use it all, you know. And so what they'll do, what happened with one of the Colombian army groups that was searching for us, they came upon an abandoned FARC camp, and so they're looking around, they're looking for clues, you know, they're trying to find the three of us, and they stumble upon a milk container. You know, like think old school milk jug, those old school milk jugs. They find a milk jug and it's filled with cash, with dollar bills. And they start looking around and they find like, I don't know, 30 something of these things filled with cash. So guess what that unit does? They stop looking for us, you know, and they start figuring out how are we going to get out of the jungle with all this is a true story, man. How are we going to get out of the jungle with these millions of dollars in cash they just found? And that's its own separate story on its own. You know, they weighed out the money so everybody got the same exact amount, and they made an agreement to, hey, let's just be quiet about this and not, you know, tell anybody we just found all this cash. Screw the gringos. We'll let some other unit deal with them. And of course, you know, dudes start showing up in town wearing nice suits. They've got these women with them, you know, they've got cars all of a sudden. And so, you know, investigation, and they found out they happened upon a huge cache of cash, FARC money, and stopped searching for us. It's absolutely insane, man. I wouldn't have been able to make it up.
So the people that were coming to rescue you and looking for you found some cash and then went and bought some vehicles and had girls on their arms and were found out.
Yeah, they were found out, and they all got arrested. They had to do some jail time. But you know, the thing is, they stopped searching for that one unit. That's one unit, right? That one unit stopped searching for us. But there, nevertheless, you know, that I just bring that up because it's kind of a funny story. But there was still evidence that there were efforts to find us, and so that made me think that my family thought we were alive. You know, and back then, this is early on. You know, we're still 4 or 5 months into this thing. And I'm like, man, maybe in the next 2 or 3 weeks, an agreement will be made, and we'll get home. I was like, I used to think the U.S. There's no way the U.S. will leave Americans behind. They will never leave us behind. So I did have hope. For a few different reasons. First and foremost, because of my faith, right? That just that alone is one reason I always had hope. But then, thinking as Americans, our government must be involved. They must be trying to get us out. Maybe they're trying to negotiate. I also thought about my company, Northrop Grumman, and thought they, hopefully and more than likely they are trying to do something to get us out. So I had a few things, maybe these were all pipe dream fantasies, but these were things that I was thinking about. Did I have evidence of any of them? The only thing I had evidence of was the air activity overhead, that told me that somebody was looking for us.
Back to it, you're still not talking again for these first year. You're not even talking. You're not allowed to talk. You're kept in a box at nighttime. You're locked in. What stopped you from just saying, man, hey, I give up, man. Like, I can't deal with this. Most people would.
Right.
I've seen people in less situations inside of the prison system give up from way less. Like, they just gave up. Something inside of them just broke. What stopped you from breaking?
For me, it was my family. I had 3 kids, 2 stepsons and my daughter, and I really desperately, badly wanted to see them again. And that when I prayed, that was one of the things. If I could see them one more time, that was it. And that's all I needed, man. I wasn't going to give up. And so, when we're in these camps and we're not allowed to speak to each other, one of the things that I started working on was how to survive that situation. And part of that was figuring out how to deal with these people that are holding us hostage. They're in charge. I really have control of very little, but I did have control of certain things. And so this phase of us not being able to speak to each other, it went on until eventually they took us out of camp one day. It was actually, let me back up. They showed up one day with razor blades and brand new camouflage uniforms, and it's funny because the camouflage uniforms, old school camo, but they said Armada on them, which is Navy. And I looked at the tags, and these were uniforms from the Venezuelan Navy. They had tags on the inside. It's like, dang, brand new uniforms. Somebody shows up with scissors. They give us haircuts and tell us to shave. And so, we're doing what they're saying. And then they blindfold us. They put us in a boat. They move us for a whole day. And they had us shoved into this little tiny area, the 3 of us all on top of each other, blindfolded, covered with plastic. We're breathing, gasoline fumes because they got the gas tanks right there. And man, I thought we weren't going to make it just through that. But then eventually they take us out of the boat. We're still blindfolded. And I recall, like lifting up, trying to see whatever I could see and figure out what was going on. And they moved us into a building, with a small room, and the 3 of us are in a small room. And eventually a guy shows up, an older guy with a camera watching him. And he comes in and he goes, I'm going to interview you guys in English. And he goes, are you Mark? I said, yeah. He goes, I have a message for you from your mother. And I'm like, what? So my mouth drops. And I'm like, I'm waiting to hear it. And he does a 180, turns around and he leaves. No message. So what they set up was what's called a proof of life. They were going to film us alive and send that out as propaganda to prove to our families, to the government, to everybody that they had us and they had us alive. Proof of life. So that was right at the 6-month period. So this, we had not been allowed to speak at all. To all of a sudden they want to interview us, and they've got this fake journalist there, doing this interview. And, again, Keith and I aren't speaking Spanish very well yet. But they had this girl there, and she caught my eye because she did not look like any of the other terrorists. She looked like somebody that had just come out of the city. She's wearing like camo pants, but they're kind of like down her hips. she's wearing like this stringy tank top type of thing, and her hair looks clean and straight, and she's just watching us. And I'm like, and I remember just noting her and thinking, that's odd. She seems odd here. Then Mono Hoi Hoi shows up. The number 2 guy, Mono Hoi Hoi, is back, and he comes in and he says, we're going to interview you. And he starts speaking in Spanish, and this girl that I noticed is translating everything in absolutely perfect English. I almost thought she could have spent some time in the U.S., but definitely European. And she's translating everything. And he says, we're going to interview you. We're going to do a proof of life. And he goes, your government's not doing anything for you. And so they move us into another room. They set up a camera, and they start this interview process. And at one point, we take a break. We're not blindfolded anymore, and everybody's relaxed. And I go up to this girl, the English-speaking girl, and for some reason I was drawn to her because of her English, and I felt like we had a connection culturally. She must be from the West. And so I said, hey, what is going on with this? Why are we here? What's going to happen with us? Do you think we're going to live through this? And she pulled out a pack of cigarettes. They smoke these cigarettes called Mustang cigarettes down there. She pulled a pack of Mustang cigarettes out, lit one up. She's not answering me. And she takes a long pull on her cigarette, and she exhales it out, and she starts shaking her head no. And she goes, it depends on what your government does. And I said, what do you mean? And she goes, if they try to rescue you, we're going to kill you. I said, what? Again, in shock. I said, what? She goes, didn't you hear what happened last month? And of course, we didn't hear anything. We're literally locked in boxes at night. We don't know anything. And she said, yeah, the government, the Colombian government found a group of hostages, and they tried to rescue them. And she said, our orders are to kill hostages. We won't let you get rescued alive. We'll kill you. And then we dissolve into the jungle. And we just killed a group of 24 last month. And man, I talk about being terrified. That sensation showed up again. I was terrified. I was like, what? You guys literally murdered, all those people? And she said, yes. And I was talking to her alone. And Keith and Tom were in that room. And so I left her and, walked a couple paces, and I said, dudes, they're going to kill us if a rescue comes. And I explained to them what she had just told us. And so they start recording again. And Keith goes, is it true that you're going to kill us? And one of their bosses says, no, if you die, it won't be by our hand. The government wants to, he starts turning it. He says, the government wants to kill you. And he's saying this in Spanish, and she's translating. And Keith's like, well, you just said they're going to kill us. And she said, yeah, that's our order. I think he's explaining it wrong. And the guy says the same thing over. He goes, if you get killed here, it won't be by our hands. And he's like, we're going to protect you. So they were, what they were trying to set up is a manipulation, because what they really wanted with this video is for us to say we didn't want to get rescued. So you know what they did? The journalist says, well, how do you feel about a rescue? Do you want to get a rescue? And all three of us were like, nope. We don't, we were thinking a rescue won't work. They're going to kill us. We're like, no, we don't. We want a diplomatic solution. We don't want to die. We want to get out of here alive. And that was all done on purpose. All of it, not letting us talk to each other, being isolated. All of it led up to this video that they wanted to produce. And the big thing that they wanted from us was for us to say we don't want a military rescue, that we want a diplomatic solution. And so that's what they got. We easily fell for it. We under duress, everything, confusion, not knowing what was going on, but it was so easy for them to get us to say what they wanted. It was sad.
So this is early in your captivity. This is early in you being held. Moving forward, were there other moments like this? Did you have other times where you felt that little bit of hope and then immediate fear? Because this would be like this would be like a field trip to somebody who's been kept in a box in a jungle. Hey, I got my hair cut. I'm coming out here. There's people that speak English. I don't speak Spanish that well. I'm actually getting to communicate with somebody for once. Like, you got let out of that box for just a little bit. And then it's this horrible news. We are under orders to kill you.
Yeah, the entire captivity was that way. It was literally an emotional roller coaster. And some of it was because we would get hopeful. Like, man, there were times when, you know, something happened, like a nut fell out of a tree. I'm like, whoa, it's got to be a sign, you know, something good's about to happen. You know, there were times when it got to that point. But there was, I mean, and there were times when we would discover things, you know, and things that were hard. You know, I mentioned we had a sister aircraft set up exactly the same way as the one we crashed in. Well, we eventually found out that plane had also crashed. And those guys, our crew, man, and I love them with all of my heart, but they were working way too hard trying to find us, nonstop, working at night, doing they would not stop looking for us. And they were probably pushing themselves and pushing the aircraft too hard. And they were running night ops, and they were trying to find us. It very well might have been them that I heard at one point or another before we got bombed. It might have been them, but they were running night ops, and they had just refueled and were taking off, and at night, and they clipped the tree, man, and the plane was full of fuel, and it just basically, from my understanding, it just basically exploded, and everybody on board was killed. So my understanding is on that plane there was only three. There was no host nation rider, which is, I don't know what, which is obviously, that's rare. That I've never seen that happen. And only one operator on board, only one guy running the equipment in the back. He was actually our site supervisor. His name is Ralph Ponticelli, and one of the nicest, biggest hearted guys you could ever know. And man, I used to think about it before I discovered that they went down. I used to say, man, Ralph is going to be going crazy, man. He, you know, watch out, because he will freaking bust in here with his own M16 and try to rescue us himself. That's the type of guy that he was, you know. And I used to think, man, Ralph must be going crazy right now trying to find us, you know. And it was true, man. He was doing everything. The whole crew was doing everything they could to get us, you know, and maybe pushing too hard, you know, and we lost that aircraft and three more guys. And so that was, you know, that was basically the end of that program. You know, we were called the SRS, the Southcom Reconnaissance System. And, you know, we went down, and then when they went down, you know, I don't know exactly what happened, but I think that was pretty much the end of that program. And it's sad, you know, when I realized we lost Tommy Janis, who had saved us. We lost Sergeant Cruz, you know, in our incident during the abduction. Then we lost three more guys. You know, I started, and I learned about the group of 24 hostages that were massacred. And I was like, man, I'm surrounded by death. Why am I still alive? You know, we just got bombed. We were shot at. We survived the plane crash. How are we still here doing this? You know, and it was a roller coaster. Those were dark times hearing about that. But then, for one reason or another, you know, we would get hopeful again. And the problem for us was we didn't have any source of information. Like, we would get news, and this is terrible, but we didn't have any other information. We would get news from the guards. Like, we started to try to befriend some of our guards, the younger ones. And we would ask them, hey, what's going on? You know, is the U.S. doing anything to get us? Or is it true what Mono Hoy Hoy said, that they're not doing anything? You know, what's the Colombian government saying? And then every once in a while, one of the bosses would come in and we would ask him questions. And man, it was like pulling teeth. They never wanted to tell us anything. So we were in a vacuum for a very long time, years.
Did you feel any anger, or did anger ever set in?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, a lot. All the time.
Towards your captors, towards the United States government, towards the Colombian government. Did you ever feel anger towards these groups? Because here I am still in the jungle, stuck.
it was it was an emotion that I had learned to control. I mean, I was angry, of course. Like, I'm not angry, man. I wanted to kill my captors. You know, like I would dream about shoving them off a cliff. I would, or killing them. I would daydream about it too. Like, I would dream about ways of killing them and escaping. You know, that was something that was ever present. You know, when it came to the outside world, the U.S., the Colombian government, there was very little information, but every once in a while when something would trickle in, it was hardly ever good news. So back then, this happened in 2003, you know, and the years are ticking along. That's when George Bush II, he was the president. And if you remember, his policy was, we will not negotiate with terrorists. Straight up, we won't negotiate with terrorists. At the same time, the president of Colombia, Alvaro Uribe, who's actually the best president they've ever had, but he had the same hardline stance. You know, he's like, I'm gonna finish off these terrorists, but I will never negotiate with terrorists. I'm gonna kill them all. So, you know, that, of course, you know, I'm not that smart, but I would do a little bit of math and I would say, okay, if a rescue comes, they'll kill us, and both presidents are saying there's no negotiation. And I was like, how, you know, where this is going to be hard to survive. And it's unknown how long it's going to go on for, you know, and in the beginning I was like, man, I'm not going to make it 3 weeks. Then a year went by, you know, and I was like, oh. Then eventually, for whatever reason, they decided to put us into a group with other hostages. And that's when I discovered Tom and I, we're not the only hostages. This is a business. And so they brought us into this camp, and it was like a built up camp.
How long was this in? About what time roughly?
This is shortly after the first proof of life. So I'm going to say at around the 9-month mark.
So still early.
Still early.
Because for the people that don't know, 5.5 years of this. Because, you know, we're going to be limited on a little bit of time. So we're going to skip around and bounce around through this, but we're going to get all the details.
Yeah.
So this is still early. 9 months in is still early.
It's still early. And leading up to the movement of this camp, we were basically in a vacuum. We never knew what was going on in the outside world. We didn't have access to a radio or you know, music or anything like that.
And think about this. You take a kid's phone away right now and they panic. You know, tell somebody to get rid of their phone and all incoming communication for 7 days. Watch how they panic. I don't know. And you've been in this vacuum. Mm-hmm. Possible fake news. You're getting fake news from the guards who don't know anything. Right. You know, they get whatever they're handed down from their higher ups. I don't even say guards, the terrorists. Yeah, the terrorists. And these, you know, they're prepubescent teens at some point, and then there's some that are basically overweight pedophiles out here in the jungle. Yeah. They don't have good sources of communication. And it's like that game when you'd whisper something in somebody's ear and they'd whisper it all the way around the room and be completely different. Right. So here you are in this vacuum. Right. Yeah. That's got to be another hard thing to deal with for years. Man, having access to zero information it sucked. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. It was terrible having zero information and just being there, you know, held hostage. And we never understood why. We didn't understand why they were holding us and what they wanted for us. I mean, we came to understand they thought the three of us were CIA agents, you know, and in their mind, you know, what they know about the outside world is what they've seen in Van Damme movies. You know, they love Van Damme. So you know, it's very skewed from what is real. But they eventually move us into that built-up camp, and the first thing they did is they brought us to this huge enclosure, man, and it was big because there was so many hostages there, and they parade us around the entire thing. It's fenced in, right, completely fenced in, and there's these elevated guard towers and guards inside of them, you know, holding their AK-47s, and I mean, this is a built up infrastructure, man. And they walk us around it, and I'm looking inside this fencing and I see people in there, you know, and I realize those are other hostages. And as soon as they saw us, they came running to the fence line
And man, they look terrible, man. They skinny, like rashes all over them, like losing their hair. I mean, they were in bad shape. But they knew who we were instantly. They had music playing, so they had a radio, and they knew who we were, and they came running to us, and some of them tried to speak English to us, and I remember asking one of the guys, "How long have you been here?" And they said, "Oh, shoot, man, I've been here 4 years, 5 years, 6 years." They said just like that, 6 years. My heart dropped, man. We hadn't even been there a year yet. And I'm like, I can't make it 3 more weeks.
How old were you at this time?
What was I? I was in my young 30s.
And time relates differently then. We know that as growing up, that when you're 18, you think 6 years from now, wow, that's forever.
Yeah.
You get in your late 30s and early 40s, you're like, 6 years, that's nothing. I can do that. 6 years fly by like it's nothing.
Yeah, still young. My daughter was only 9.5 when we went down. It was, the time was important to me. I couldn't imagine doing another week or 2.
Hold on right there. I want to get into a little bit of the psychology of this. Again, we're going to skip around. I want to keep it fresh. So let's stop at the 9-month mark right quick. Mark, over these 5.5 years, and I'm not asking you to skip too far ahead or any kind of details, but there's times in life where people feel proud of a certain act. You feel like, hey, I was strong in this instant. I remember a time incarcerated when I was locked in a cell. They took away my property. I was in there. This is nothing in comparison to what you've been through, but I felt strong because they denied me food. They were like, we're not feeding you today, or they would give you what was called an air tray, where there was a tray with no food on it. And I didn't complain. I didn't do anything. I just looked at them, and I felt strong for that. I felt like, you're not going to break me. I felt strong. Was there a moment at any time, any kind of act, or any time that you felt that kind of strength? And can you relate to that kind of strength?
You mean leading up to that or after that?
Any time during that period.
Yeah, later on, years later, 4 years later, the FARC wanted to do another proof of life. So they did one at around the 6-month point. And for whatever reason, I don't know why they waited so long, but it was 4 years later, they wanted to do another proof of life. And I knew, years have gone by, right? So I've adjusted and adapted to the situation. I basically learned how to become a hostage. And I also learned how to deal with the terrorists. And one of the things that I did not want to let happen again, like happened the first time, was I didn't want to be manipulated again by them, ever. So when they came and they tried to set up another proof of life and do the same thing that they did the first time, I just didn't participate. So when you see the proof of life, the second proof of life video of me, first of all, I'm way skinnier because I was on the FARC diet, right? You don't eat. But I'm not saying anything. I'm just standing there, and I've got a rag in my hands, and I'm swatting bugs out of my ears, and that's it. What they wanted was for me to say something, to plead for mercy, to say that I didn't want a military rescue, to do. They just wanted to manipulate me, and so, over the course of the years, I wisened up and got strong enough to say no. And that was hard, man, because that was my only opportunity to look into a camera and tell my family that I love them, to tell my kids that I love them, that I think about them every single day, that I want nothing more than for them to be happy and to see them again. And I had to give I had to give that opportunity up. And that was a lot. That cost a lot.
Sacrifice.
Yeah. It was a big one. But I'm glad that I did it, because anything that I would have done that they would have wanted me to say would not have helped me. And I started to learn that. Nothing was going to help me. The best thing I could have done was just did what I did, which was stay quiet. I couldn't run away from the camera. I had no power to do that. They filmed me, but I didn't participate that time.
And you felt that inner strength, like, I can do this. Like, you will not take this from me.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing, man. To have that, especially after 4 years. After 4 years, I'm gonna sacrifice this opportunity to say something.
Yeah, it
because
cost a lot.
I'm not gonna do what you want me to do.
Right. Yeah, it cost a lot because I just wanted them to know, and I know they knew, right? But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. When you love somebody, you can't not tell them, right? You have that opportunity. You haven't been able to speak to them in so long. You can't not tell them that you're thinking about them and that you love them. And so it was hard, man. It was hard, and that's another reason I can't stand those people. I won't go as far as saying I hate them. I hate what they do. But it's, I just see them as pure evil.
Another thing I want to ask you, this is skipping way further ahead. It's just something I want to put in here now. And again, we're going to bounce around.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like seeing your children for the first time after 5.5 years?
So, the way we fell into that situation, it only took a few minutes. The way we came out of it was just as fast. And so it was a radical change. And when you are a hostage for any length of time, all you think about every day, all day long is freedom. I never, ever stopped thinking about being free. So when I was finally free, it was like, is this real? It was crushingly intense being free. And believe it or not, man, the first meetings with my family left me with migraines because of the emotional intensity of being able to see them. And so my kids were fairly young, when I went down. My daughter was 9.5. My son Cody was 12. Joey was 14. So he was getting older. Cody was still young, still a little boy. Destiny, a little girl. Well, when I got back, Destiny she's 15. She looks like a woman now. She came and gave me a hug. She smelled like a woman. She's wearing perfume. I'm like, where's my little girl? She's all grown up already. Cody's voice has changed. Joey is a man now. He's got tattoos. All of my kids are walking around with cell phones, and things had so much had changed in the 5.5 years that I was down there. But it was extremely intense, and I loved seeing them. I was so happy to be with them, but I was also like trying to understand and learn as much as I could about everything that happened while I was gone. And it was hard, it was hard to really regain my position as their father in their lives, because they saw me and, in a way it was kind of novel type of thing that happened to me in their eyes. They never really understood everything. And in a way they saw me more as a friend than as their dad, as their father in the beginning. So there was a lot of work that I needed to do, and that I didn't even really know how to do, when I came back to regain, my position as their dad, to love them, and for them to love me, but also to respect me as their father.
So the reason why I asked this question at this point in time is because it puts things in perspective. We're still early in the journey, and all of this is going on, and what you've conveyed to me as a friend is that your children were paramount to you during that time period. There's two things that you've always brought up to me when we talk about your captivity on a personal level. One is your children, the other is your faith. And there's things that you mentioned afterwards. One is your wife now currently, who's an amazing person. And if you guys get a chance, you can check out Marc's Instagram page. He's an amazing dancer. The guy that, I don't know what other hobbies he's picked up in his time, but he picked up the right one when he started dancing. Your experiences afterwards, the fact that we do know, because you're here, that you survived all of this.
Right.
There's little pieces and parts that we need to talk about the end to understand what's going on now. It puts things very much in perspective, that your children are growing. They're getting bass in their voice. They're getting tattoos. This whole time while you're away, your daughter's becoming a woman, growing into womanhood. And here you are, stuck for really no reason. Really for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I talk about the disparity between, we're going to talk a lot about incarceration because you did get into prison reentry, and that's how we met. And, you know, I want to talk about the disparity there a little bit. Incarceration is completely different. I deserve to go to prison. I deserve to be incarcerated. This man didn't deserve to be held in the jungle for 5.5 years. And this goes for a lot. There's hostage situations right now in the world, especially in the Middle East. And people can look at you now and talk now about a situation that you've got the opportunity to process and possibly get a perspective for their loved ones. You don't know how you're helping people even now, Marc. You've helped people since I've known you. And again, you're an amazing person. Backtracking. You earned it, trust me. I went through something called close management at a very young age. CM is where you're locked into a cell all day, and they want you to stay quiet. You're locked. You're kept cells away from other people. They would put like 2 or 3 cells, and we would have to learn how to talk through sign language, or we would write kites or notes to each other, you know, to have that communication, because it's human nature to want communication. And when I left out of there, I went to close management when I was 18, and I left out like when I was 20. I spent a good amount of time back there. Later on, I felt like I left a part of myself back there. Do you feel like you left part of yourself in the jungle?
You know, no, I don't, not at all, because I took everything out of the jungle. When I got out of there, I took everything that I gained while I was there, I took with me. And that was on purpose. I mean, that was part of my survival mechanism, you know, was one of the things I used to tell myself all the time, and I tell inmates that I work with now, is don't let this time be wasted, right? You know, I was there. They moved us a lot. They would move us from one camp to the next. That happened regularly, but there were also a lot of times when they would make a camp, and when I say a camp, they would tie us to a tree, or we would be in this little enclosure sitting in the mud and have nothing to do all day long. And so I decided I wasn't going to let that time be taken away completely. I was going to improve myself and not let the time be wasted. And so I came up with this outline. You know, I ended up calling it my personal life outline. And it hit 5 different areas where I thought I could improve as a man, as a person, as a father, and as a husband. And in the beginning, you know, they had given us pen and paper and little notebooks, and they wanted us to keep journals, you know, and I was immediately suspicious. They wanted us to keep journals. So anything I ever wrote down, I made sure I destroyed it at one point or another. So I started working on my personal life outline, you know, and I memorized it, and I would recite it to myself every single day. And that was one of my mantras, man. It was like, I'm going to gain something while I'm here, if it's possible. And I did. You know, I ended up learning to speak Spanish. I had so much time to just reflect, you know, and I used to think about things that I did or things that I didn't do in the past, or things that I said or things I didn't say, you know, and I went through this self-reflection period, you know, and really just did, you know, some self-analysis and decided and defined the type of man that I want to be if I was ever to be free again, you know, and I started working on that. And it included just being a good person, but it also included being educated. You know, I as a kid, I didn't want to go to college, you know, and then while I was there and I had zero access to anything, any written word, anything, I was all of a sudden, you know, the kid that didn't want information. Now I'm starving for it. I'm having dreams that I'm in a bookstore and I could read any book that I want. So you know, I really wanted to prove, and physically too. And so, you know, how as crazy as it might sound, you know, when we were hostages and being held in these little areas, my routine included working out every morning, you know, and the little that I could do, I would do. Like if there was a log on the ground, I would step up and step down, step up and step down. I would do that for 30 minutes, you know, alternating legs. If we had access to anything, like a stick and tie it from one tree to the next with vines, I would be doing pull-ups, or I'd get down on the ground and do push-ups and or whatever I could. That became something I did every day. And there were some benefits that I didn't think were going to occur. You know, one of the benefits though was they moved us on foot through the jungle all the time. I mean, I don't know how many hundreds of miles we walked on foot, carrying heavy backpacks too. And the very first time they moved us, we were being locked in those boxes that I talked about and hadn't been moving hardly at all. When they made us move, that was absolute torture, man. I was so out of shape. You know, it just didn't have the wind to make it. Feet were always hurting, getting really bad blisters, and I didn't want to do that anymore. I also came to realize if I'm going to get out of here alive, I might have to escape. And if I'm not able to physically do it, you know, I need to be ready. So those were things that I thought I was going to gain out of that. But what I found was I also started to get an immense control over my own peace when I exercised. And I think a lot of people that exercise now, they see that. Like when you have to miss the gym for a while, you know, some people like me, I'll get depressed. I will literally get depressed when I start missing the gym. So something happens, you know, some kind of chemical reaction happens when you have more control over your peace when you're exercising. And so that became super important to me. And that's one of the coping mechanisms that I came up with dealing with captivity. Again, it's awe-inspiring to just sit here and talk with you and hear this story, because a lot of the details that you're giving me now aren't in the book. Like the emotions are there, but it's not as in depth. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about two other things before we rewind and go back to that 9-month period. We're going to probably have to do this in parts. So, yeah. Which is good, because this is the juicy details. Do it in parts. Do you still talk to Tom and Keith? Yeah, regularly. I had dinner with Keith last night. Yeah, I mean, those guys are blood brothers now. You know what I mean? We are brothers, and you don't get to pick your family. You know, so you're born with who you're born with. Well, this was the same way, man. I didn't choose to be hostage with them. I didn't choose to be chained to Keith. We were chained to each other for a long time. But that's what we did, and we grew very close because of that. And there's not a lot of people that have done this. You know what I mean? There's not a lot of people that were forced to go through something like this. And so, you know, and I feel reasonably okay socially with everybody. But when I get to talk to somebody that has gone through this, it's a whole different level, right? And so we have a very special connection, and that's for life. You know, we're family now. You know, and I love that. As the same that I feel the very same with all of the other hostages. I spent time with a lot of other hostages while I was down there, and you know, when you know this from your time incarcerated, when you have a bunch of people stacked on top of each other in a little area, you will always have conflict. And sometimes those that keep you there, they want you to have conflict. They don't want you to be united. The FARC were like that. They would cause division because it made us easier for them to control. So yeah, I'm not going to say, you know, everything was lovely amongst hostages in the jungle. We would have lots of arguments and disputes and positioning and all kinds of things, man. It's its own society down there. When you're a hostage in a group like that, it's its own separate thing. But despite anything that one did against the other, in the end, we were there because a terrorist group did that to us. We weren't there by choice. And that's the way I view everybody that I was held hostage with. You know, I love them all, and I want them all to do well. But Keith, Tom, and I, we were the only Americans down there at the time. That group has held other Americans over the course of their existence. And I'm going to say this because this puts things in perspective. Good people, imagine just being on the street one day and your car crashes and you're kind of like out of it, and somebody comes over, grabs you, stuffs you in the trunk of another car, and kidnaps you for 5.5 years. Doesn't feed you, doesn't give you medical treatment, just pushes you to your absolute limits, tells you, hey, I'm gonna let you out tomorrow, don't worry about it, I got you. That kind of puts things in perspective.
they put a gun to your head, dry fired a few times. Like, this is how close to death it was. This is the wrongness of this situation. This wasn't war. You know, Mark, you were a civilian at the time.
Right. Yeah. And they're a terrorist group. They're not an army. They're not sanctioned. They're basically a cartel.
Yeah.
You know, they are narco terrorists, and they claim, you know, and all, you know, terrorists all around the world, they always latch on to something to justify their evil deeds. And the FARC does the same thing. But all you got to do is look at them, look at what they've done, and it's clear to see, you know, who they are and what they are. And they still exist today. You know, they're still out there doing what they're doing.
Rewinding a little bit, let's go back to that 9-month period. So you just went into this camp, and there's people there that know that you are American hostages because they have access to a radio, or because they're current on events, or were they abducted after you were?
No, they were abducted long before us. But they had, for whatever reason, their conditions were a little different than our conditions. They had radios. Like a lot of them, they had their own little AM, FM radios, shortwave radios, which are really important to have. You know, a shortband radio can receive a signal from thousands of miles away. An FM radio, the signal has to be super close, like only a few miles. So they were up to date, man. They knew everything that was going on. And so when we got put into this camp, you know, they had the camp divided. They had a lot of military hostages there, either Colombian policemen or Colombian army. There was around, I think it was, I think it was 28 of them in one side of this camp. And then there was a division, a physical divider, and they had a smaller section of camp where there was 10 more people, and they were all civilians. And they went and they put us in the civilian side. And so, you know, we went in there, and I'm starting to pick up on some Spanish here and there by now, just by listening. And there was a lady in there who was famous. She was running for president when she was captured. Her name is Ingrid Betancourt. Well, she spoke English, and that helped Keith and I a lot to understand what's going on. And she had told me that she heard my mother. And I'm like, what do you mean you heard my mother? How did you hear her? You heard her on the news or what? And I learned that Colombia has such a culture of kidnapping and holding hostages that there's radio stations that will have family members of hostages. They call in, leave voicemails, and then they would air the voicemails at night. Like, you know, when no one's listening to radio, they would put them on at like midnight. There was another show that did it on Sundays, every single Sunday starting at midnight. Another one that did it at 5 a.m. in the morning. And so Ingrid said, yeah, I heard your mother's voice. She said she loves you. She said there's a commotion in the U.S. They're trying to get you out. And then they caught us up on the news, you know, and that was great to finally get some information, you know. But I was taken aback, you know, and so I was like, well, how can I hear my mother's voice? Like, how can I hear her? I would like to hear a message, and so. I was given access to one of the radios one night, and lo and behold, man, my mom came on, you know, and I remember I'm just like, you know, we're in the middle of nowhere, so everything is staticky. The reception is not that good, and I am so focused in on hearing my mother's voice, like too focused in, man. I was so intense on it that I heard her. And when the message that she left was over, and it was short, it was maybe 30 seconds, man, a minute at the most. When it was over, I didn't remember a single thing she said, man. All I knew was I heard her voice. And so I was like asking everybody, I was like, what did she say again? What'd she say? You know, and it was just a message of love. You know, we love you. Don't give up. Be strong. We're fighting for you. You know, it was just a simple message, but the way I received it, man, that was food for me. And I had been starving in the jungle, and I heard her voice, and I was instantly filled with hope, you know. And I was like, yeah, man, I can make it. I'm gonna make it out of here. You know, I don't know what I have to do, but I can do this. And so access to a radio became extremely important, but very infrequent for us. Whenever we did have access to radio, that's what it was for, man. It was just so we could hear messages from our families. And over the course of the years, it wasn't often that we had a radio, but the times that we did get to hear voices from home. My mom was one of the strongest. I mean, she was always out there, and eventually I would hear her doing interviews with the news, and she would say things I would cringe, man. She would, she was angry. She was angry at the governments, both the U.S. and the Colombian government, because we were still there. She expected that they snap their fingers and be able to get us home, do whatever it takes, make a negotiation, give them whatever they wanted. And, she would say things, she would be mad, she would say things about President Uribe. And I was like, oh, Mom, don't say that, even in the jungle, hearing Mom's voice.
You said it was food for your soul. After all that time, like your mother's voice, the voice that you heard when you were in the womb, the voice you heard as a child when you skinned your knee, the voice you heard when, you had a problem and you went to someone as a child. This was the voice you heard over the radio. That had to just, were there tears?
It was so emotional, man. It was so emotional, so strong that I don't even, like I said, I didn't even remember what she said. And so I'm sure I was in tears. And I know I was shaking, I was trembling. And I know I was trying to capture and listen through the fuzz and the static of the radio signal and capture every word she said, and it was intense. That's one word to describe it. It was extremely intense.
Could you feel her love through those radio waves?
100%.
Wow.
100%.
Dealing with your mom, we're going to stop there. We're going to take a pause, and we're going to pick this back up because, Marc, this isn't a story that we can just skip over or take pieces out. We want the whole story, and I'm sure our viewers are going to want the whole story. Again, send your questions in, send your comments underneath. We're going to respond. We're going to respond to everything that we can. Me or Marc will directly answer any questions that come to us through our instant messaging or so on and so forth. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap Reform Mindset for now. We're going to be on a to be continued to our next episode. Please stay tuned. Please continue to watch. We appreciate you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.